Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui tēnā koutou. Welcome to you all who are joining this webinar from all across the country. Welcome to this, our second webinar in our Just Kai series, which is a collaboration between Kore Hiakai and the Ministry of Social Development. It's fantastic to have you with us as we explore this topic of mana to mana, an amazing resource, an amazing taonga for our sector that will hopefully guide us to some pretty incredible outcomes. Let us open with karakia. It's one probably many of you will know, so feel free to join with us wherever you are. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ka tai. Ki
aki ana te atakura,
he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei,
mauri ora.
Kia ora. So as I said, this is our second webinar in the Just Kai series. And the purpose of this is to really explore topics to do with food security within our communities. As you'll know, the Ministry of Social Development has been in this space quite intentionally post-COVID, as we have seen the needs within our community to increase food security and ensure that people have access to kai. And we work closely with Kore Hiakai about what the sector looks like and the ways in which we can change it to be more accessible and more sustainable moving into the future. And so this set of webinars is an opportunity for us to engage in good conversations about different ideas of what good practice can look like. And we acknowledge very early in those conversations the role of Te Tiriti and the role of the treaty in guiding us in partnerships in this space. And so, yeah, this is an opportunity for us to go deeper into one of those topics. And we'll continue this series for every 2 months for the rest of the year, and hopefully next year too, depending on how things go. We'll see how we get on. So I'd like to hand it over now to Trish. No, we're going to do some introductions, aren't we? So using your chat function, you can also introduce yourself, and we encourage you to jump on there right now and type in your name, who you are, and what organisation you represent, and maybe even the place in the country that you are based at the moment, so we can get a bit of an idea about who's joining us within this webinar. That way we can create some connections as well, and you can see who around you are also involved in these conversations, and you may want to connect with them. So my name's Neil Ballantyne. I'm part of the food security team, or the food secure communities team at the Ministry of Social Development, and I have a focus on managing relationships between Danny Verk and Invercargill, which is of course a large part of the motu, but I'm very privileged to explore that part because it's obviously one of the most beautiful parts as well. And so I get around and see what's happening in the grassroots in the food sector, which is an absolute honour.
Kia ora koutou, ko Trish Malcolm aho. Trish Malcolm from Kore Hiakai Zero Hunger Collective. It's our privilege to work with MSD in this space, to be in a space where we work with community food organisations to do best practice, but also do the slow, deep work of trying to find how we can shift the root cause of poverty-related hunger. So that's our role in this space. And it is my privilege to introduce my partner in crime, Alannah, who has helped guide this process over the last 12 months. So kia ora, Alannah, and welcome for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Trish. Wo tēnā tātou katoa I hikama, ko Waitangi, ki te taha tōku māma, ko hukurangi tōku maunga, ko te whānau rā kairoa me te whānau rua taupare o kunei hapu, ki te taha tōku pāpā, no England, Ireland, Wales, all of those confederations, ko Alannah Marriot tōku ingoa no reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Privileged to be here today in terms of this kaupapa, which is a critical impact zone really for all of humanity, given that you can't survive without kai. I'm going to give some time back to Trish now to offer us an opportunity for us to reflect on what this practice model actually means to everybody.
Kia ora, Alannah. When Kore Hiakai, who's been around since 2019, when we engaged with community food organisations across the motu, one of the things that was identified was how might we do best practice, and particularly practice from what we called at that stage a mana enhancing perspective. And so we decided we needed to really dig into that space. We asked Alannah to help guide us in that. And we engaged with a rōpū of rangatira who have a lot of wisdom in this, to explore what might be some of the key principles and values that needed to undergird that. And from that, we produced a taonga, a document called Mana to Mana Practice in Community Food Distribution. And it was in the journey of doing that where we were exploring what it might look like to do community food in mana enhancing ways that we actually really discovered for ourselves. We're mostly Pākehā organisation, but we discovered for ourselves with beautiful guidance that mana enhancing was not enough. We needed to recognise that we come with mana and so does everybody else into this space. And so it was about how we join our mana together. So we reframed our thinking and called it mana to mana principles of community food distribution. So it's really amazing to be able to present this to you. The document itself can be found on the Kore Hiakai website, www.zerohunger.org.nz, and you can download it from there. If you want to look at it in more depth, you can. But we really came to this model of trying to discover what we might be able to gift into the community food space from an understanding that it's only when we reflect on what we do and assess how we're going and move ahead in the reference to how we've reflected that we actually get a deeper set of practice going on. That allows us to choose whether or not we should still be doing something that we're doing or whether we need to let go of it, whether we need to let go of being in a space. So if you could give me the next slide now, that'd be cool. So I hope that you guys have maybe a pen and a piece of paper near you. And so one of the things that's important when we do reflective practice, and it wraps around the whole way that we use this resource, is that these are the kind of questions that really help us move into the reflective practice. But if you're doodling next to your watching this, then you might like to think about what's your why? What's your why for being involved in the community food space? And alongside your why, what might be the values that you think you bring into this space? Those are two really helpful things to reflect on and reflect on regularly. They aren't the things you should reflect on once and then put on a shelf. They're the kind of things that's really helpful for you to bring back into your practice every day or every week or every month or at least every year. So what's your why and what are your values? It's always good to, Brene Brown always says you should have no more than 3. I'm a bit more generous than that, but maybe what's your top 2? And then one of the other really much more searchy questions that we use in this space as we went around this is, what do you actually get from being involved in this mahi? So what is it that you truly get out of that? And that's one of those questions that you ask yourself. And then when you, excuse my spelling mistake, when you ask it again and then ask it again, you kind of find, what do you get out of it? It's not just the person being helped, but what actually comes for you in this space. How is it that you are in this space and what's going on in that? So this is what reflective practice is about, and that when we are involved with people, we should, it's helpful to be involved in reflective practice too, because how we are with another can change from person to person, change from day to day, and it's helpful for us to take those learnings on board constantly and make sure that we are being as whole as possible in that space. So that was kind of one of our starting points in coming into the mana to mana frame, knowing that this was going to be a rich and fertile ground for us to dig into. So when we move into what space we're in, we talk about being in the community food space. So we think that this is about kai, and so it's really important for us then to reflect on what is kai. So I'm going to hand back to Alannah and invite her to give us some of her wisdom.
Kia ora. So people, as we move through this space, we are going to be referring on Māori and core values and kopapa that come out of Māori. I just want to segue from Trish's kōrero that, you know, the values part's really important. We're going to be exploring that soon. And values are important because they are the DNA of culture and they are indeed the DNA of our behaviours. So reflective practice, bring it on. So, yeah.
Sorry, can I just jump in? There was just a little question that came up in the group chat about where to find this document, Trish. I thought you might just want to give a little rip to your website.
Yeah, so www.zerohunger.org.nz. Go on there and you'll find it in the resource section on the website. Sorry, Elaine.
Kia ora, kei te pai. So people, now that you've had a bit of opportunity to reflect on your why, which locks you into this agenda, and the values that drive that, and also, of course, what's the reciprocitous exchange? What do you get out of it? I think it's a good moment now to turn our heads to this notion of kai, this concept of kai. And I invite you to maybe write a sentence or two about what your understanding of kai is. And whilst we're receiving those comments feeding in, I'll just have a little bit of a frame up myself around kai. In doing this, I actually want to acknowledge all those other Māori stakeholders in informing these models. So in terms of kai, we often think of it as consumption. We definitely are conditioned into a consumer environment. That sort of drives our behaviours. And I think that what we tend to forget about is that kai is also very much about production. And, you know, we talk about teachers being kai ako. When it's used in that prefix, it turns into a role and a function. So I think the challenge we have in the 21st century is that consumerism relies on consumption by the consumer, but we forget about production and distribution. I think in terms of that sovereignty space, that's where whānau are really wanting to reclaim their self-determining rights to produce kai. So we've got any feedback there around what kai means to people?
We've got some lovely ideas around nourishment, around well-being, connection, warmth, satisfaction. It's about who we are.
Cool.
How's that?
Nice, love it.
Some pretty smart people out there. Eh?
Absolutely. And I think Neil and I were just talking earlier about when engaging in the production part of kai, you are inexplicitly connecting with the whenua. And I think, again, that's one of the challenges that we have. You know, when you march across the road to New World, there's not really connection in terms of where that kai's come from and the energy that goes into production and caring for it. So kia ora for your feedback. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm now going to hand it... Oh, we're going to move into a space where we want to talk about mana, because obviously this is a core component of this resource. So again, I'd like to invite you to write a few kupu down around what you believe mana to be. What does mana mean?
Take away the cheat sheet from the slide. Go back to the kai one. But yeah, if you can input into the chat your thoughts around mana. And
I mean, to be fair, mana is very much a colloquial term now across our country. We hear people talking about, oh, that person's got lots of mana, or that one's a mana muncher. So what is mana? So while you're thinking about that, I want us to think about a couple of things as you're thinking about what does mana mean to you. I want you to consider, is it a dynamic or static concept, meaning that when I'm born into the world and when I leave this world, I'd like to suggest to you that it is indeed a dynamic space mana, because it is reciprocitous and it is determined by my deeds in the world. It's also impacted by my whakapapa. That has an impact. You know that out there in the world, you hear a certain whānau name and you go, oh, that whānau. So then there's a whole lot of expectations around that person with that whānau name. The beautiful thing about all this is we have choice around the behaviours that we choose to demonstrate as human beings. And the other thing too with mana is that mana is, we all whakapapa back to a divine source. Whatever your worldview is around that, for us as Māori, we whakapapa back to beyond the genesis of time to the creator. So with mana, you know, we all have a divine element. We see reference there in terms of mana atua, and that is central to the core concept of mana, that there is a power higher than me, that there is a whakapapa relationship to that higher power. And secondly to that, we've got the kupu, or the concept of mana tangata. Mana tangata is really the physical manifestation of my mana in the world through my acts and deeds. So Neil, what have we got in there?
Yeah, we've got a few ideas coming through the chat. And the first comment I think was quite useful. They said they didn't really know how to explain it, that they'd heard about it and that it's something they want to learn more about, which is exactly the point of this. And I guess I feel the same. When I first read this section of this resource, I was just really struck by the difference between mana atua and mana tangata, because I think when we use it in a colloquial way, it's often the mana tangata. And to know that it's coming from atua and having that spiritual connection was really special for me.
Kia ora.
But for people who put in ideas around intrinsic worth, around potential, around just who I am, and around shared gifts.
Nice.
I thought some beautiful ideas too.
I think the key thing to remember, people, when we're out there working with other human beings, is that everyone carries mana. And what that means, you know, even when we're working with people where it's difficult to see that divine spark, we must remember that he tangata ke no te atua. So, you know, there is a spark of divinity in everybody. Yeah, kia ora. And moving on from this, we're now going to have a look at our Māori, the Māori worldview, and I'm certainly not going to put myself out there as an exponent, heck no, but what I will say is that from the works of the Reverend Māori Marsden, no Ngāpuhi Ia, he was one of the last to engage in the Māori worldview, the esoteric space within our wānanga, and he also then engaged in the Western world space in terms of theological school and Christianity. So he was quite an extraordinary man. And if you get the opportunity to read his book, The Woven Universe, please do so, because it's quite extraordinary. So what Māori Marsden did was he looked at Te Tiriti or Waitangi, I'm talking about the Māori version, and he extrapolated out these core kaupapa, and we can dig a little bit deeper into what kaupapa are in a tick. But you will be familiar with these. We've got manaakitanga. Look, it's got the word mana in there. You know what mana is. Aki is to uplift and to, you know, the way I treat you is going to be a direct reflection of what I think of you. So it's as simple as that, really. Moving along to kaitiakitanga, the concept of stewardship. We don't own the earth we stand on. We are occupants. We are inhabitants of this space, and we have a duty to leave this whenua in a better condition than how we found it. So kaitiakitanga. Wairuatanga, everything has a spiritual element. In terms of the Te Ao Māori worldview, the wairua element is key. In fact, our tipuna said that the real world, you know, lies kei tu atu o tēnei ao. It lies beyond the physical world, that the physical world we occupy currently is purely a world of perception. And it's our various perceptions that create our reality. So wairuatanga is key, and we apply certain tools to engage with that world and also leave that world intact in its space. Rangatiratanga, leadership. Ranga, to weave, rāranga, to weave. Tera, a group of diverse people. To be a leader, you need to be able to weave diverse people. You need to be able to determine strategy and have huge vision. From a Māori worldview, for me, leadership is servant leadership. We're there to serve the people, and that's our role. Ukaipotanga, ko te ko te waiu o te wahine, that is the mother's breast milk that feeds the baby. Kai, of course, is food, not only the consumption of it, but the production of it. And po is, of course, the nighttime. So ukaipotanga is that connection back to that primal space of nurturing. For me, it's to go back home on the coast and engage with my people at home. Sometimes it's a walk on the beach, depending on who you are. But ukaipotanga is something that anchors us and locates us within this physical world. Moving along, whanaungatanga, relationships, connectivity. Without relationships, you don't have kaupapa. So people, connections, networks are absolutely critical in the way that we develop those relationships. And of course, now we land on kotahitanga, which is unity. The sum of the total parts is far bigger than each one of those parts. So 1% of every one of you is worth a hell of a lot more than 120% of Alannah. So in closing, in terms of when we look at the understanding that they are interconnected and interdependent, meaning that they are also cause and effect, just like we are cause and effect in the world. So they do not sit within silos. If you're doing whanaungatanga, you're doing kotahitanga, you're doing the whole lot, you're certainly doing manaakitanga, or otherwise you wouldn't have a relationship. So they're all interconnected and interdependent. Kia ora. So we now come to this core concept of aroha, ko te aro ki te hao te tangata. And, you know, one thing that the old people always said was ko te mea nui ko te aroha. If you actually look at the whakapapa of human emotion, there's only two core human emotions that we're doing. We're either operating out of fear, or we're operating out of aroha. If we're doing trust, gratitude, we are definitely doing aroha. If we're operating out of an emotional space of anxiety, jealousy, anger, then we're operating out of causative of fear. So what we're saying in this space, in order for those kaupapa to be well oiled, like in an engine, the oil that binds all that together and keeps that engine rolling is aroha. And I think we'd all agree that politically we operate out of frames of fear, not aroha. And I think we need to be really aware of that in this space, especially when it becomes quite a dynamic, contestable space. What does aroha mean when you're in a competitive environment? So the opportunity to work together collaboratively is really key. And we know that in the food sovereignty and food security space, it's not just Kore Hiakai and MSD that are going to make the difference. It has to be communities, it has to be all of us, and it has to be across agencies. So kia ora. Yeah. Oh, are there any?
No. Yeah.
We're all good?
Mm-hmm.
So people, just in terms of, we've talked about these kaupapa, but I invite you, if we look at that word kaupapa, what does it mean? It's a bit like the word mana that we bandy around a lot, you know. But what is kaupapa to you? What does it mean? So if we look at the kupu kaupapa, ka, u and papa, ka is to ignite, u is to land and make solid. Papa, of course, is a solid foundation. Kaupapa for me is your intention and your purpose. So when we look at the intentionality of those kaupapa welded together, there is a higher order around the agendas that we run. So I say to people, you're either on the kaupapa or you're not. It's as simple as that. You're either on this high intentionality around cracking and solving this issue around food distribution, etc., or you're possibly on a personal agenda. So when we move into a kaupapa space, and I think that's where reflective practice is really important, Trish, is we need to be clear about what are our drivers. That's where we started with. What's your why? Because if it's for fame and fortune, well, you might be in the wrong space. So this is a kaupapa agenda. There's no other agenda. It's about the distribution and the production of kai and how people are connected to that space as a fundamental human right. What have we got coming at us?
Yeah, people are talking what you said, essentially.
So, that's good.
Looking at purpose, looking at principles, ideas, values, purpose.
Nice.
Lots of thoughts around purpose.
And cool. And I think in closing, Neil, what I'll say about kaupapa is do be aware of distractions, because there are many of them. And sometimes they are distractions that are bureaucratically driven. Sometimes they are distractions that are domestically driven. Sometimes they are distractions that may be driven from a community level, but be really aware of where you're putting your energy, because one thing we constantly hear is, you know, there are a lot of people out there doing some really good work and they're exhausted. You know, so we need to get smart about where we're putting our energy. Again, that comes back to intentionality. So kia ora koutou. So I'm going to hand this now over to the lovely Trish.
So as we developed this resource, we really tried to think about how this might be helpful on the ground. We're really lucky that members of our team have been part of community food organisations themselves, and so we have an understanding of how we might land that, and we went and took it and tested it with organisations and groups to see, does this work? Does this have meaning for you? Would this be helpful? And as we did that for each of the 7 kaupapa that fit into the atom, we built an icon, we built a whakatauki, although there's multiple whakatauki that can fit in any of these spaces, we picked 1 or 2. We then really got our groups to thrash out, well, what does that actually mean for the community food distribution space? And so there's, in the main document, you'll find a larger kind of expansion of how this really looks and what this really feels like and why this is important in this space. And at the end of each of the kaupapa pieces, we've built a whānau statement, which we asked whānau to say, so if you actually were feeling that thing or experiencing that thing, what would manifest for you? How would you know that was actually happening? And so those statements have been built by really listening to whānau and asking them what it would mean in the community food space to experience ukaipo, or to experience whanaunga, or to experience manaaki, and that's how those statements have been written. And so if you have a look at the main document, you'll find each one of those. The reality is too that they're really rich, and we find we just do one thing a month to actually really get our head in, because of how rich that space is and how much there is to really explore and experience together. And I think that's the other thing I'd probably say is this resource is really a journey together, either together in your organisation or with other organisations that you interact with, so that you can really add your own meaning to each of these kaupapa as well and weave that together. We're hoping too that this might be able to be used in your spaces as a bit of a reflective review tool, so that you might actually look at some of those statements or look at some of how that's explained and say, oh, well, if we put that on a scale of 1 to 10 or however you want to do that, where would we think we fit at the moment? And you might then say, oh, if we only fit at a 3 on this particular one, what might we do over the next however long in order to be able to get that dug in more depth for us to be able to feel like we're doing better at that thing. And so there's an opportunity for this to be something that helps you move on your own journey by using it as a bit of a review tool. So we hope that that's something that will be helpful for people.
Goodbye.
Awesome. We're going to explore a little bit more some of these kaupapa, and we're just going to see how we go in terms of time. And we might stay longer on one particular kaupapa than some of the others, but this is an opportunity too for you to kind of explore what you think these things mean in your space.
And do put through any questions as you go, and I'll try and insert them in. Not trying to interrupt you too much, but and just insert them into sort of, so we can go a little bit deeper into some of these too as we get along. So anything that you're a bit unsure about or wanting a bit more clarity on, feel free to put a question in the chat and we'll try our best to get to them.
Goodbye. Okay, so ukaipōtanga. If we look at the whakatauki there, me hoki koe ki tō ukaipo, return to your source of sustenance. And I think that for you practitioners out there doing amazingly good, solid work, I think this is a really important piece to be mindful of in terms of where do you re-energize, how do you re-energize, both spiritually and physically and mentally. And I think it's about acknowledging that people have different ways too of finding that sustenance. So I think that's the key one around that. I think the key question to you is, so how do you incorporate that into your practice? Yeah, where's your source of ukaipōtanga? Are you aware in your teams when there's someone flailing who perhaps needs a little bit of extra support and a bit of time out, in fact? So those sorts of concepts.
I really like this because I think, in wider circles, we often talk about self-care, which sounds a little bit kind of, not so deep.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about, coming back to your source of sustenance, it just,
Yeah, it's amazing what a weekend at the marae can do to get your head back straight on. So, anything you want to add to that?
And when you're looking at this in terms of whānau, how do your whānau actually return to their source of sustenance? So sometimes when we're distributing kai, that can feel a little transactional. How does the engagement with kai become a source of sustenance for those whānau that you're engaged with in this space? And how do you have conversations with them about what their source of sustenances might be, that you might be able to lift that up as well in the way that you're engaging? So I think this is really beautiful. And I'll just say that, these are coloured different colours as well. I forgot to kind of let that one in earlier. So this one is coloured this particular kind of yellow. It's the only one that's coloured yellow, and at the moment it looks really yellow, but it's often called karatani yellow.
Yeah.
So do you, I was going to say, you might want to, yeah, that's baby poo colour. And there is actually a saying about you don't let someone who shits yellow sit on the pai, and it's that sense of actually we need to nurture that which is really early in us. So that we make sure that this stage has actually gone through. It's very easy sometimes in social service to jump to the end stage with people, but if we don't acknowledge what people's source of sustenance is, then sometimes it doesn't really matter what else we offer them. It doesn't land well in the first place. So we actually need to make sure that we've paid attention to this very early piece of work within the way that we do our practice. The other thing I'll just add into this space too is that 660 have a beautiful song, Roots, and if you listen to it into Te Reo Māori, then you will get this word sung to you many, many times, and it's actually a really lovely way I've found to really rest in this and really let it kind of sink into my soul. So homeworkers, go listen to 660.
So Trish, we've had a question about whether or not these slides will be accessible later. And I guess that's an opportunity to rep the resource, right? Because basically everything that we're talking about here today is in the resource and it goes into more detail. And so it is a PDF, and so you can print it off and turn it into a little booklet for yourself.
Yep. And they are being printed, and so they will be able to be distributed. So if you really do want a hard copy version of it, you can let us know and we'll.
And maybe we should mention at the back is a bit of a glossary. So that can break down the words a bit better as well.
If I can just enclose you around ukai pōtanga, I want us to think about and consider, ultimately with these kaupapa, we can't affect any change anywhere without being in rapport with the people we're working with. So that's about meeting people in the map of their territory, a map of their worldview, and in the map of their value space. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. The second thing is that what we must also be mindful of is that, as you know, and I know, that many of the people that we work with actually don't have access to their ukai pōtanga. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. That's why the relationship part is so key. This is not transactional, this is actually relational. Yeah, kia ora.
Cool.
On to the next one.
So, whanaungatanga, he kano he kitea he ringa he awhi. So, again, this goes back to, this is not a transactional space, this is a transformational space and a relational space. So, for Māori, the face that we engage with bureaucratically or sometimes even at a service delivery end changes on a regular basis, but the face of iwi and hapu and whānau don't change that much. So I think it's about consistency, and it's about, where possible, creating relationships and sustaining those beyond a transaction of here's a food parcel.
Wait for it to come back. We have a unstable internet connection. Sorry, people.
So is there anything you would add to that? Is there?
Yeah, so Paul has given us a little reflection for ukai pōtanga, which is that they reflect with their team and have a check-in with the team to see how they're feeling on a scale of 1 to 5 and do that weekly, which I think is a good way to sort of connect these kaupapa, right? Because that maintains those relationships and checks in to make sure that everyone is functioning at the same level.
I like this other comment here too, that really what this comment is alluding to is that kai becomes the vehicle for the relationship to occur. And that's why manaakitanga is so key. That's why, because kai is a common leveler for human beings. We all need to eat. So I like that commentary there, that through when you're giving food parcels, etc., it creates a gateway or an opportunity to learn and find out more about that person. Becomes a vehicle. Kia ora. So what have we got next? So manaakitanga, we've had a bit of a chat about that. He mana tō te tangata. I think that we've covered that today, that, you know, we treat people with respect, we don't make assumptions, we navigate to operate, to understand the map of their territory, no matter how different it might be from my worldview, etc. And of course, the second one is a commonly known one, no te roro, nāku te roro, ka ora.
It's quite amazing in some ways with COVID that we saw people sort of, because it was such a national emergency, sort of shaken out of their day-to-day BAU kind of approach, right? And it sort of forced us into the space of collaboration. It forced us to reconsider our silos and those assumptions of why we do things so siloed and often in little bubbles, and gone, actually, we need to do stuff more together. We do need to do stuff more collaboratively for the good of the whole community, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's the, excuse me, I've got something stuck in my throat. I think that's the catalyst of crisis. It's unfortunate that often it's a crisis, and I'm not crying, it's just that my eyes are watering because I'm coughing. Fortunate that it's not till we actually are in a state of crisis where we see people actually doing that naturally without being made to.
And we often use this whakatauki no te roro, nāku te roro, ka ora ai te iwi around Kore Hiakai's work, but in this one, we particularly thought it fitted so well with manaakitanga in that sense of mana to mana, and it's actually that admission that with only our basket, we can't. We can't. And so we have to be really humble about realising that whoever is standing in front of us has as much as we have, even if we look like we have more. And so it's kind of really reorientating ourselves. And I think often in the food distribution frame, particularly in traditional food banking, we've often forgotten that, is that actually it is this reorientation of ourselves so that we are equal and in relationship to and humble in front of. And so that's one of the things I think is beautiful about using this particular whakatauki for this particular kaupapa, and that kind of understanding of aki of uplifting and encouraging someone isn't atting at someone. It actually requires us to let their light shine more than our own. And so I think that's, for me, one of the beautiful things about this particular kaupapa.
One of our attendees had said that for some of us, this is BAU, which is great to hear. Although I'd say there's probably, there's always more we can do. There's always deeper collaborations that we can go through and more relationships that can be fostered. We've also got another comment here that let's hope it doesn't take another pandemic for us to join together more, or another national emergency, which is absolutely the case, right? Like it should become our BAU. It shouldn't take an emergency, right, for us to uphold this kaupapa.
I was just going to say, I'm really happy to hear someone say this is BAU, because I think as humans, we often get a little bit insecure, and it's easy for our egos to creep into places. And I think for me, one of the things that manaakitanga does is it invites me to let go a little of my ego. And so I think that it's really cool to hear that for some people this is BAU, and I can't do that without a regular reflective kind of stopping that, where did I put my ego right there? And so I just think that that's a beautiful rhythmic practice, and I really offer you.
Yeah, should we roll into the next one?
So kai te akitanga, manaaki whenua, manaaki tangata, haere whakamua. By caring for the land and the people, the future will be prosperous. And I think more than ever, like we're at a tipping point. We know that as a species, we're at a tipping point right now in terms of our relationships, not only with each other, but e hika mai, our relationships with the whenua, with the moana, with the tai ao. And, you know, if we look at all the research coming out around this stuff, again, through whakapapa, from a Māori worldview, I am implicitly connected with the environment within which I locate myself, the natural environment. So to neglect the natural environment is actually to neglect my own state of oranga and health. And we must care for the land and keep that connection going. If we have disregard for the land and we have disregard for the animals and those other species that occupy that land, then it's probably highly likely that we tend to end up disregarding other people as well in that space. So we can't survive without the whenua, we can't survive without the moana, and we can't survive with the extraordinary interrelationships and interconnections between all of those elements that makes planet Earth Papatūānuku. So it's key, consciousness.
Of course, we see incredible healing for people going back into that space, right? Who've
Totally.
been disconnected from the whenua, who've been disconnected from growing kai, and then seeing the work of their hands bursting forth.
See, and that's the thing, that's where consumerism, I think, is really quite, you know, rampant consumerism is quite deadly, because what it disconnects us from is the production element. And it's a production element after you've like sown those seeds, the broccoli's growing, 6 to 7 weeks time, you're now harvesting that broccoli and it gives you a buzz. It's like, whoa, I'm totally connected with these plants that I've planted. It may seem really simple, but you know, the truth generally is really simple. Yeah.
And I guess with this, we're not saying that, you know, everyone needs to become vegan, but at the same time, the more you are connected to the environment and growing your own kai, the more you sort of realize the impacts, right, of your consumption. The more you realize the impacts of the food that you're eating and how that has on the planet. Whereas perhaps if you're disconnected from it, you just, you know, grab your meat, you grab your milk or whatever, and you forget where it's being produced and how it's being produced. So yeah, to be a good steward, sometimes change our dietary choices.
Yeah, you can. And I really like the way that this kaupapa helps us to reorientate ourselves. And before I was talking about in terms of manaaki, when my ego might get in the way of my interaction with somebody else. And that's what I find with this, with kaitiakitanga as well, is it invites me to let go a little of my ego, that my person isn't the center of the world and the universe. In actual fact, you know, that doesn't all exist just for my benefit and my pleasure, but I am in relationship with all of it. And so it's almost that's my whakapapa into that space, whether it's with other people and with the whenua and everything within it. And so again, it's an invitation to be light on the old ego.
Yeah, one of the comments reflects that actually just on the chat here. Creation is total species, includes all humans, all in all. So again, showing those interconnections, which is great. And another comment talking about how great it is to see environment and community talked about together, where often they're seen as sort of, again, siloed things, but so interconnected, obviously.
They're inseparable.
Completely. Shall we move on to Wairuatanga?
Wairuatanga, he ira tangata, he ira atua, he human life force, a divine principle. Again, it's that remembering that we whakapapa back to divinity. Within that whakapapa too, when I think about it, what that draws me to realise is that the quantum potentiality in human beings, we are quantum. For me as a Māori woman, I certainly see myself as quantum. And what I mean by that is because of the whakapapa that I carry, and all human beings have whakapapa, if I look at the expansivity of that whakapapa right back to the dawning of time and consciousness, I'm all of that. And I think that's the wonderful thing about the choices that we make, and to enable us to actually draw on our fullest potential. So he ira tangata, he ira atua, that's a dynamic space to centre ourselves in. I'm not just who I am now, I'm my past, present and future, and I'm a whole lot of other things in between as well. Yeah.
And I guess it's okay to acknowledge that this is tricky for many people, right? In terms of we exist in a fairly secular world. And so things like wairua are not often spoken about or often come, especially into our professional circles and our professional lives. I know I used to be a youth worker, and youth development was my space. And when we're talking about Te Whare Tapawha, you know, it was always the spiritual well-being of a person that was the hardest to kind of work through and examine. Sure. And so I was wondering if you have any practical suggestions in there about how we might apply that within a food sector kind of space.
I think that, so if I look at it from a practical perspective, like we're all familiar with karakia, I'm assuming, out there in this world. And I mean, we apply certain tools in this space to the other thing too for us as Māori worldview, it's not a deficit mentality. So it's actually a realisation of abundance. I just saw that thing zoned out then.
There you go.
So we apply certain tools, but I think it's also, there's a saying out there, ngā tohu o te wā, the signs of the times. If we are not still and now, what happens when we're distracted by chaos is that we end up missing the natural signs that the environment constantly gives us. So, for example, where I live out of my rohe. I don't live in Ngāti Porou, I live over in the rohe of Whakatohia. And we're very aware of the shift in the seasons and certain birds calling at certain times, signalling certain crops should be planted. And if I was too busy in that space, I would not be aware of that. So the other thing I want to say about wairuatanga is that from a Western world epistemology, and this is not saying that one worldview is better than the other, all I'm saying is they are different. So the Western world epistemology came out of the sciences and was compartmentalized really, in the sense that if it's not tangible and physically manifest, then it doesn't exist. So that's one of the reasons why when you work in this space, wairuatanga becomes quite challenging for some people, because the conditioning in terms of Western world epistemology is that it's something over there that is perhaps not always acknowledged, or just acknowledged in different ways. But for us as Māori, it's like paramount, really.
Speaking of things we can't touch, unfortunately, our network is having a few glitches. So apologies out there if we dropped out at any point. And unfortunately, we might have missed a little bit of your wisdom out there. But we don't have time to recover that ground, unfortunately. But we hope it's stabilised now and we can carry on.
Kia ora.
So apologies for that.
Kei te pai. So, here te taura tangata, weave the people, kotahitanga. I'll repeat it again, unity is plural. The sum total of each one of us is worth far more than 150% of one person. Kotahitanga, I guess some people would say, oh, it's similar to synergy. You know, the sum total of the parts is bigger than it creates a bigger output. But this whole thing about kotahitanga is a really important one for me personally, because I think in a fear-driven political culture, it's very easy to forget that we are all connected. Whether it's through whakapapa, well, we are all connected through whakapapa because we're all one species. So that's my take on that one, and I think it's a really important one. In fact, the Reverend Māori Marsden said out of all of those kaupapa, that one was key.
Mm-hmm.
I think too, in the community food space, it becomes an invitation as well, because quite often we can get quite siloed in our one organisation, doing our one thing or addressing one aspect of somebody's needs. And in actual fact, kotahitanga invites us into a bigger space where we can collaborate, and we don't have to be the one that solves everything. We can work with a rōpū of different ways of approaching things, including everything that the whānau bring into that space at the same time. So it's again that opportunity to see ourselves as a thread of rather than the thread of.
Yeah.
And that's really beautiful. And it's even not even just that here in this community space, it's a thread of education comes in this and government comes in this, local and central. It's all of those threads and seeing ourselves as connected. And I think we're quite good at snipping ourselves up in the world and seeing us, we don't have any ability to affect that. But actually there's an opportunity here in that kotahitanga space to see that this person's lived experience has just as much power as a decision over here in government, and how do we connect those things together?
And I guess speaking very, very carefully, I think it's worth acknowledging that often our resourcing and our revenue streams don't encourage this.
No.
And that is something that certainly our team at MSD is very mindful of and trying to work through creatively, but also recognising that, that can separate sometimes, and it's something we do need to address in the medium to long term. Cool. Moving on, a little bit time-wise, but pushed, but rangatira tanga.
He kai aku ringa, there's food at the end of my hands, and really that's the pentultimate, The pentultimate is for humans, for individuals and whānaus and collectives to have access to the spaces to be able to produce their own kai. It also to me that whakatauriki also says to me that like I said earlier, we are quantum, I have it within me to find a solution. So the kiwana, back in days of old, one of the key things about a rangatira was their ability to feed the people, their ability to be able to access the resources, the natural resources, to keep that whānau hapu iwi alive. So he kai aku ringa is really, really important, especially in a time when we're seeing unemployment statistics, all those sorts of things. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, and it's that ability to feed myself and my whānau, whether it's I've produced the food or I have the access to that, that I have access to affordable kai, and that I can actually find my way of choosing what is appropriate in our space. So that's the ultimate is food sovereignty, and that's what rangatiratanga is about.
And I think what I want to add to that is that the impact on people's mana when we can't do that. So I'm sure everyone's got stories to tell, but when you've been in a position where you can't put petrol in the car, you haven't got a car, you can't access kai, it has a huge impact on my mana and how I feel about myself and how I feel in the world. And it's a sad thing, because really when we think about it, human beings require water, food, shelter, and love to survive. It's just a basic human right to be able to do that. So, in mind, when people come to food banks, it must be so hard to do that, because it's a reflection of, it impacts on my mana deeply.
And it's probably worth noting that there's a range of national dialogues happening in this space at the moment, Trish, in terms of what food sovereignty looks like as a whole country, and all the different parts of the systems which all contribute to people's ability to engage any sovereignty, have any sovereignty over how they have access to kai. And that's probably potentially even a topic for a future webinar that we can dive in a bit more deeply. Involves all kinds of interesting aspects, including things like seed sovereignty, which is quite fascinating.
Water sovereignty,
all kinds of spaces, all kinds of things. And so we're going to now throw it over to Trish to wrap up this space.
Thank you for being on this journey with us, and thank you for all the wisdom that you've shared back through the chat function. It's really wonderful to be able to read that and feel that and weave that in as we go. This is the beginning of a journey for Kore Hiakai, and that the document itself was released at the end of March. It's accessible on our website, and you can download it. But you can also have conversations with us about how you might use that in your own context. we're starting a series of workshops with Alannah giving us some of her wisdom in that space across the second half of this year. So please just contact us if you want to know about them, or you can receive our regular communication, which will let you know when those things are happening, particularly on our Facebook page is probably the best way to see those ones quickly. Yeah, any feedback that you have, we'd really, really love to have on the way through. So kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. Ngā mihi anō kia koutou, ngā mihi hoki ki te kaupapa nei, kia kaha kia manawa nui. It's a privilege.
Kia ora. I just reposted a comment there from Dawn Hutchinson, who is well skilled to the food sovereignty space, and she's given some recommendations for some amazing online resources and films that you can go into to see a bit more of the whakapapa actually, about where this korero has come from and where it is going. So I've reposted those, so I think everyone should be able to see them. No, I cannot click the slide. There we go.
I can stop sharing if you want.
Cool. So again, incredibly, we're on time, Trish. We're doing pretty well at this, aren't we? Keeping us just on time. So once again, a huge thank you for joining us. A huge thank you for the amazing contributions and wisdom that has been shared.
Do you want to put us off share?
Oh, yes, I can do that. Or can I?
The red button. Yeah.
There we go.
Woohoo, there we are.
Cool.
Yeah.
Maybe you can see us a bit bigger. That's great. And yeah, we'd like to just wrap up with a karakia, which again, you may know. So you may want to pray along with us on this.
Me noi tātou. Kia tau,
Kia tātou katoa.
Te atawhai o tō tātou ariki, ai hukaraiti, me te aroha te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga, ki te wairua tapu, ake. Amen.
Amen. And of course, the recording of this will be available on the Community Research YouTube account, which we will send out to all attendees. Feel free to share it with anyone at all that you would like. And do stay connected with us through either of our newsletters is probably the best, either our MSD Food Skill Communities one or the Kore Hiakai, and that's the best way to stay up to date with future webinars. Ka kite.
Ka kite.